In one corner is Canadian media mogul Conrad Black, owner of some of the world's great newspapers. In the other, Bob Hawke, the man we elected 4 times as Prime Minister. If we're to believe what they say about each other, one is a liar and a bully, that's Black, according to Hawke. The other, a money-grabbing disgrace to the office he once held, that's Hawke, according to Black. The juicy events that part caused this public spat occurred at a Sydney hotel where the Hawkes were long-term guests, and it's come into the open because of a Senate inquiry into alleged deals between the Keating government and Conrad Black. At issue was Black asked to support the Labor Party in the election in return for a bigger slice of the Fairfax papers. What's clear is Conrad Black never promised to mince words. Do you think that it's appropriate for an outsider to this country to turn someone who commanded all the respect that Bob Hawke commanded from the vast majority of Australians into a liar and someone who degraded his office?
After he accused me of being a habitual liar and an anti-Semite, I think he was inviting an extremely withering and violent riposte, and I think anything less than that would have been tantamount to an admission that there might be some slight degree of veracity in what he said. I mean, he started this, yeah, I didn't.
But those of us who are neither media moguls nor politicians are faced with a judgment now. That is, do we believe you, an outsider, or do we believe the man who commanded all this respect in this country for so many years?
Well, if you feel on the horns of that dilemma, then I'm sure you'll come down on the side of probabilities of truthfulness. If you feel that you must choose between us, I would have thought the balance of evidence, despite the great office that he held for many terms, is one that I am quite comfortable with.
So our former Prime Minister is a liar?
I'm not saying he always lies, but he's certainly lying in this case.
I know it's hard to read people's minds, but how could so much malice have entered into the equation with you and Bob Hawke?
I'm not sure. I mean, as he had an unhappy retirement, he clearly was not particularly enjoying himself in his successor employment as the official greeter of this new hotel in Double Bay. I mean, it's somewhat of a diminution of status after being Prime Minister, but that doesn't explain how you lash out and accuse people in such an irresponsible and defamatory way as he did.
You also made the claim that Bob Hawke approached you, suggesting that you hire him secretly as your organisation's eyes and ears in Canberra. Can you tell me more about how that came about?
Yeah, he actually approached my associate Dan Colson, who generally stayed in that hotel when he was here in Australia. So he saw a fair bit of Bob Hawke. I did not have the same pleasure. And as I understand it, he does this sort of thing for a number of foreign clients and said that he would be happy to do it for us as well. It had to be anonymous in order for him to be effective, and his fee was $50,000 US.
So this was a personal contact made with Dan Colson?
Yes.
Face-to-face request?
Yes.
Was this ever attractive to you, this offer?
No.
How do you respond to the suggestion that it was your organisation that headhunted Bob Hawke and not the other way around?
Absolutely false.
Absolutely clear on that?
Not a scintilla of truth in it. It was an offer, came as a bolt from the blue from Bob Hawke to Dan Colson, and it was received as a surprise, very courteously received as a surprise.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you aware when you came into this whole Fairfax bid of the long-term animosity between Fairfax and the ALP?
I was aware of some of it, yeah. I was aware of some of it.
So when Paul Keating said to you, I will entertain the prospect of you upping your stake in Fairfax if your reporting is balanced, did the word balance not have any other potential connotation in your mind?
It was conceivable to me, on the basis of other things that he had told me, that what he in part meant was that he had not thought in the past that it always had been balanced.
But do you honestly believe that the Prime Minister gives 2 zacks about whether you cover the opposition's affairs fairly?
No, he doesn't, but he would care, to the extent you described in that phrase, if we were covering it in a slavishly adulatory way.
Let me just put to you the darkest view of this, which is a view no doubt taken by some of the senators on the inquiry, that given the long-standing animosity towards Fairfax on the part of the ALP, that the Prime Minister was perhaps subtly saying to you, behave, support us, at least don't be obnoxious as far as the ALP is concerned, and yes, we'll consider upping your stake.
I didn't get a trace of that. I mean, if that was in his thoughts, it was not in his words. And you know, we're all unlicensed psychiatrists, but it really is a bit rich for me to say, well, you know, the Prime Minister said this, but I really think that he meant something quite different.
Can you understand, though, given the unease in this country about media policy and the way it appears to be conducted in a kind of a wink and a nod fashion, can you understand the unease about a proprietor like you chatting casually with the Prime Minister about favours you might want?
We weren't talking about favors, we were talking about government policy. I suppose I can bring myself to some comprehension of unease about the idea that someone in my position would have any discussion with a head of government. I suppose up to a point I can understand that, but I think that when the dust settles and current emotionalism subsides, it will not be hard to sustain the case that there's been a great degree of overreaction in this whole thing. What I actually wrote about my meetings with Paul Keating did not justify a Senate committee and did not justify the vaporizations that have gone on about it.
Well, Trevor Kennedy, once the chief executive of your bid for Fairfax, says of you, for a smart bloke, he's done some pretty stupid things. If he hadn't opened his big mouth, none of us would be here, meaning at the Senate inquiry. Is there any truth in that?
If there is, I do apologize to Trevor and all the others who were inconvenienced by it. But did I open my big mouth? I mean, did I, in writing, he said that if he were re-elected and Fairfax political coverage was balanced, he would entertain a bid to go higher, or an application to go higher. I mean, is that opening my big mouth? Is that really the monstrous indiscretion that I've been pilloried from Brisbane to Perth and from Hobart to Darwin for committing? I would have thought not. By any standards I've seen anywhere else, that is a completely innocuous statement.
But, Mr. Black, the fact is that your supposedly benign words spawned a parliamentary inquiry. That's no mean feat, is it?
It's no great achievement, in my opinion.
We have heard you lacerate a former Prime Minister, belittle a former Treasurer, criticise the Leader of the Opposition. There's hardly anyone left, is there?
No, I dove of peace coming here with a sprig of mistletoe in my beak. I spoke nicely of all of these people.
If you can wipe the irony from your brow for a moment, the fact is we've heard and seen you do all those things. We are left with this image of you as a truth teller in amongst a sea of liars.
No. That's not fair. The only question of anyone really crossing the Rubicon in matters of truthfulness was Bob Hawke. That's the only one. I mean, it was a bit rich for someone who'd asked us for a job to be an anonymous lobbyist spying on a successor, to invent out of his imagination and his own sloppy research grounds for calling me a liar and this imputation to me of anti-Semitic tendencies, which is just completely scandalous. I mean, aren't you, as an Australian, slightly embarrassed that you have a former Prime Minister who would carry on like that? I mean, it is completely shocking. I mean, is this normal, acceptable behavior in this country to go around accusing totally innocent people of being racial bigots? I mean, is this done? I would have thought not.
Do you think you've now settled the score?
Yeah, I think I have set the record straight. Now, if he wants to come back for another round, we'll have another round. But if he has any intelligence left of what must at one time have been a considerable reservoir of acumen to have achieved the office he did and to have held it for so long as he did, he's not going to pursue this loser any further.
Well, Mr. Hawke, are you, as Conrad Black suggests, playing a losing hand here?
Well, that'll be for others to judge, but if I can just go on what I've seen then, you can immediately establish the total unreliability, indeed verging on, one would think, mental instability of the man. He's saying again there that I have accused him of anti-Semitic tendencies. I was asked by the chairman of the inquiry about the meeting I had with him, what happened. And this is what I said, on which he's basing those absurd propositions. I said, to the extent that you want to get the flavour of it, I must say at the outset that I was not particularly impressed with Mr. Black, who regarded it as relevant and necessary to tell me that he was not Jewish. Having said that he owned the Jerusalem Post, he gratuitously had to tell me that. To me, it is a matter of irrelevance what he is or is not.
Okay.
Now, there is no way, Jana, on the basis of what I said there, that he can begin to say that I accused him of anti-Semitic tendencies of behaviour. I mean, that is a grotesque misrepresentation. It is a lie.
Let me look at this through Conrad Black's eyes. He believes that you were saying that he gratuitously distanced himself from Jewishness as though it was something bad or embarrassing.
No, but this is Conrad Black's attempt, as part of his whole program in this exercise about the media inquiry, to create a diversion. I mean, it is a nonsense.
I'm just trying to get to the heart of really what you meant. If you weren't saying that Conrad Black was distancing himself from Jewishness, what were you saying?
I'm simply saying, Jana, that I don't like anyone coming up to me and saying, I'm not something. I mean, it's an insult to me to be saying, I'm not Jewish. That is carrying implication that that is relevant to me. It is not.
But of course he makes another claim that you've distorted the whole conversation, that this conversation had another context altogether, that you have chosen to disregard.
Well, he's totally wrong. He introduced it at the beginning of the conversation. It had nothing whatsoever. It wasn't in the context that he subsequently tried to portray it, that this was something relevant.
So he walked in and said, I'm Conrad Black, I own the Jerusalem Post and I'm not Jewish?
Right at the beginning of the conversation.
Mr. Hawke, your respective recollections, accounts of what took place between you are so different that this is not a question of a simple misunderstanding. We're talking the difference between truth and lies, aren't we?
Of course we are.
All right, he told us that the suggestion that his company approached you with a job had not a scintilla of truth to it. Now, how can we make sense of your differing accounts?
Well, I think the easiest way is to go to the transcript of evidence. Senator Kernot, to Mr. Colson, the man with whom I had the conversation, will you confirm what Black has said, that it's Hawke's approach? He said, what I am prepared to say is that Mr. Hawke and I had a discussion sometime last year. Mm-hmm. I mean, he given the opportunity of confirming Black's statement, Black's misstatement of the fact, and he declines to do so.
Most Australians would be aware that since your Prime Ministership, you've been involved in various business dealings, in consultancies of one kind or another. Why shouldn't we think that in this case you made your services available to Conrad Black?
What Mr. Black has said, and as I say, tried to blacken my reputation, is that I approached them and made an offer of $50,000 to be the eyes and ears in Canberra. Impossible to spy on my successor. Now, Australians out there would laugh at that proposition that Hawke's going to go and lob himself in Canberra and spy on Keating. I mean, what sort of fairyland does he think he's in? I did not raise the issue. It came as a surprise to me when Colson started talking about it.
But presumably
and
you would
neither
have...
I nor he followed it up.
Presumably you would have considered working for Mr. Black.
If they had put a specific proposal to me, of course I would have considered it. But I am not in a situation where I'm going to accept this total fabrication. I mean, it is just a monstrous untruth.
Do you think that the dignity of being an ex-Prime Minister has been a little sullied by the mere fact that you're in the headlines day after day amidst this torrent of abuse?
My reputation would have been sullied if I'd copped and allowed to go unchallenged his lies. I couldn't have lived with it, and I don't think Australians would have respected me if I had.
But in essence, we're looking at one man's word against another.
No, we're not. We're looking at much more than that. I mean, you've got the situation where he says now that John Hewson says something. John Hewson has been in the box saying that's not true. What Mr. Black is saying is not true. You've got Bob Hawke saying that's not true. You've got John Kerrin saying that's not true. I mean, what the Australian people are going to say, oh yeah, this Canadian multi-billionaire bloke, he's the truthful one, and Bob Hawke, Hewson and Kerrin, they're all liars? Oh, come off it.
I don't want to reduce this to prize-fighting terms, but are you prepared to go another round if it's required?
Well, I am by nature a peaceful bloke. I really am. I don't go looking for fights, and my reputation has been fixing up fights, healing things, as you know. That's my whole reputation. Now, if he goes on, then I will continue to respond. I mean, I'd be prepared to enter into a deal with him now. I mean, if he'll stop telling lies about me, I'll stop telling the truth about him. That's a fair deal.
Well, there is to be another round. After we recorded those interviews, the two men actually agreed to confront one another here in our studios. Everything was set to go when Conrad Black unexpectedly pulled out because of a mix-up with his flights back to London. But he and Mr. Hawke are champing at the bit to have that debate, and so are we to bring it to you next week on 60 Minutes.
Hello, I'm Liz Hayes. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9 Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.